Hi, welcome to Nutshell Recap. Let's dive into the story. Enid refused to accept his request when he knew that Glunn was testing him. He directly told him that it seemed that he tried to test his skill with that tattoo to see if he could recognize it. But he doesn't take requests from someone who doesn't trust him. Glunn was flustered and hurriedly apologized for doubting his ability. But Enid was very angry at him and refused to accept his apology. He was getting teary but composed himself because he didn't need people like him, judging him, testing him, and if he sometimes fails, even just a little bit, they come running from a mile away with a smirk on their face to mock him. He was not taking that anymore, so he shouted at Glunn to leave. But Glunn grabbed his hand and asked him if Enid was going to walk away without even hearing what he had to say. Hearing it, Enid paused, but he was not convinced, because was it worth his time? Nothing good had happened listening to liars. Glunn was very apologetic. He understood him getting mad, but he hoped Enid would understand his situation as well, because he too had encountered so many liars. Hearing it, Enid couldn't get it, so he asked what he meant by meeting so many liars. Then Glunn explained to him that he had seen countless sorcerers for the past 5 years to lift that curse. Wizards, alchemists, shamans, and witches. He could name them, and Glunn had met them. But the results were as he could see. Enid was now more understanding of his situation because in his own case, most of the so-called renowned people brought their reputation with money or through connections. Glunn again apologized for not being honest because he had been through a lot as well, so he seemed to have acted overly proactive. Seeing him guilty, Enid stopped him from further explaining and told him that he understood his situation, but it didn't feel good to be tested. He would let it slide this time, but from now on he hoped he could be straight with him. Glunn nodded and agreed. Then back to the problem. Enid offered Glunn to sit down and asked him how much he knew about the spell circle on his back. Glunn replied that all he knew was that it was a curse, and then he sat down on the chair. Enid looked at his back and asked him to explain when and how it was applied to him. Glunn told him that, as he already said, he knew nothing about who did it. It started as black dots, but in a few days it became what it was now. But Glunn didn't tell the whole truth and hid the fact that his body turned into an 8-year-old boy. To an age, he still hadn't awakened the power of dragon blood. Enid pondered a bit. He was not entirely sure what kind of curse it was. But one thing that stands out is that it's been shaped to look like a dragon. Hearing it, Glunn didn't understand it. So Enid explained that his tattoo, which was a spell circle, right? If he wants to change the shape to look like a dragon, he first needs to compress all the spell circles like that crumbled paper. It was a difficult process, so not many could pull this off. But the question was, why would someone try to do that in the first place? It might be because the dragon symbolizes bad luck, so to add some meaning to the curse. But Glunn didn't agree with him. The Western continent regarded dragons as foul creatures, but in the East, dragons were sacred beings, and they were the symbol of Glunn's family. He would assume that they wanted to disgrace his family name, but he didn't say all this to Enid. While Enid was busy thinking about the spell, then he asked Glunn if anyone had ever touched these spell circles, because there were 10 spell circles overlapped on his back, but that one was totally different from the others. That one seemed to suppress the activation of the curse. It seemed as if someone tried to solve the curse but failed. So as an emergency measure, drew a spell circle to suppress its effect a little. Glunn watched him speculate all the odds and out. However, he was very surprised because Enid was surprisingly accurate in his thesis. Just as Enid had speculated, Glunn had spell circles that were not related to the curse. There were those who hated him, but also those who followed and protected him, although they had failed to fully lift the curse. They had managed to make Glunn return to his true form for 5 days every month. Please like and subscribe. Glunn asked Enid if he would be able to get rid of that curse. Enid replied no, not at the moment, because that spell circle was created by an individual. Glunn was confused as it was any different, so Enid explained to him that whether it was a wizard or an alchemist, every one of them put a password on the circles they had created, so that others couldn't copy it. Hearing it, Glunn asked if that meant there was nothing to be done at that point. Enid thought for a moment and replied that he would need to decode it to be sure, but it will take time. But then he asked Glunn to hold it still and went near him. Glunn flinched, seeing him very close to his back. It felt like Enid was breathing on his back. Glunn's face had turned red, while Enid obliviously tried to smell his back. He told him to try to hold still, even if he felt bad. But for Glunn, this was torture, because it didn't feel bad at all. On the contrary, his heart was beating so fast. He was imagining that if Enid's lips would touch him by accident, even this little thought was huge torture for him because now, it bulging down below. Sorry, I have to be careful about the YouTube guidelines. Glunn was thinking of grabbing Enid, pinning him down under him, and kissing him to the heart's content. But this dream was not going to be fulfilled this soon. Glunn should better stop this wild imagination because his bulge down below was not getting any better. He thought that Enid was putting a honey trap, so he must not fall for it. He endured it and asked what he was doing by breathing on his back. Enid replied innocently that he was just sniffing. Glunn blushed in embarrassment, but asked him that he had never seen any sorcerer that sniffed his tattoo. Enid replied that he was right. This was a very basic technique that only apprentices would do. A sorcerer would normally never do this in front of others because it might harm their reputation. Glunn's face was turning blue and black, thinking that Enid was making excuses. He didn't know what he was up to, but he shouldn't let his guard down. But Enid was very close to him and sniffing his back non-stop. So he asked shyly how he smelled. Enid paused, but this pause made Glunn's heart race. He was wondering if Enid would say he smells very good. But the words that came out from Enid's mouth were the smell of rotten gutter. Now it was time for Glunn to be shocked. What? I smell like a rotten gutter. I didn't know that. These kinds of thoughts were whirling in his mind. His face turned pale, but one good thing happened was his bulge down below returned back to normal. Enid noticed his disappointment and hurriedly explained that not to get him wrong. He only meant the smell of the spell circle, which was bad, but he didn't smell any weird at all. Hearing it, Glunn instantly became happy, but then he realized the problem. His mood was swiftly changing due to Enid. From Glunn's point of view, Enid had some skills or two in seducing. He was better than he had thought. This picture of Enid is in Glunn's mind. The narrator was laughing while writing this episode. This was totally wholesome. Please stay tuned. Like and subscribe for more. See you guys in the next video. Have a good day ahead. Bye.